He also, okay, and this is a fact, he told their kids that if he ever beat their mother to death, that he would have to kill them too. This is what he instilled in his kids. But yet in the movie, they show him as being a loving father and a loving husband. How does that add up? Does it add up to you? It doesn't add up for me. In real life, he used to kill homeless people for sport. He wanted to find different ways to kill people. And some of the methods that he used cyanide. He liked that. He used cyanide because cyanide didn't leave a trace. He strangled people. He shot them with a bow and arrow. And then obviously he killed them, he knifed them. I mean, he killed in every different way that you can imagine. Again, this is a psychopath. How do you make a movie about this guy? I don't get it. And that's why it was very difficult for me to even get through the movie. You know, look, people, I spent 25 years on the street. I've seen my share of stuff. I don't want to look at stuff like this. I really don't, especially when a guy is claiming to be part of my life. Another thing, in the movie they claimed that he was a loving father and a loving husband, and that was the one redeeming quality that he had. I do believe he loved his family. I'm not saying that he didn't, but his wife, Barbara, in a book later on, claimed that he used to beat her, claimed that he tried to smother her with a pillow, claimed that he tried to run her over with his car, claimed that he hit her so many times in the nose, he broke her nose a couple of times. So how loving is that? That's not love to me. This guy, he's one of those guys that might have been better off if he fell asleep early on in his life and just never woke up. I don't know what else to say about it. Let me tell you a couple other things about him that were just horrifying and startling to you. Again, just showing you how bad this kid's childhood was. His younger brother, later on, actually raped a young girl and threw the girl off of a building along with the girl's dog. Went to jail for it, was in prison for it for a long time. He got convicted, I believe, of 5 murders. And these were not mob-related murders. These were murders that he committed. It was an investigation. He got caught through his own misdeeds in the path that he took. That's how he got caught. There was no mob snitch. And by the way, you know, there have been many, many informants in my former life in the Gambino family. You know that. None of them, to my knowledge, informed Don Kuklinski. Why not? Because it never happened. Because he claimed to be doing all these things with DeMeo and with the other 5 families that he never did. Not one informant that I'm aware of pointed a finger at Kuklinski for doing anything mob-related. And let me tell you another thing. Kuklinski, pathological liar as far as I'm concerned. What happens to him in the end? In real life, they catch him. Normal investigation on murder. They catch him. He goes to jail for life. He died in prison. They didn't resuscitate him.
Pronge had developed an effective way of delivering the poison through a spray bottle. He claimed that one spray to a victim's face meant almost instant death. Kuklinski decided to take the new weapon for a test drive.
He picked out a guy who looked like a likely heart attack victim, guy in his 50s, overweight, bad shape, and he walked toward the man who was coming down the sidewalk. He reached in his pocket, took out a handkerchief and the little cyanide bottle. As he passed the guy, he feigned a sneeze, covered his own mouth, and sprayed in the guy's face. He took maybe 4 steps more, collapsed. Everyone thought he had a heart attack.
Robert Pronge was an Army-trained demolitions expert, skilled in the use of plastic explosives, grenades, and various bombs. On one contract hit, Pronge and Kuklinski had trouble getting to their target, and the pair put Pronge's skills to use.
They would put plastic explosives on command cars, little electronic remote control cars, and so what they did is they drove it under his limo as it was about to take off. And they blew him up there.
Kuklinski was sold. He bought a garage across the block from where Pronge stored his Mr. Softy truck, ready to learn from the master. As Kuklinski schooled himself in the art of murder, his relationship with Roy DeMeo suffered.
Kuklinski wanted to control you, dominate you, and you work for him and he'll tell you what to do.
But DeMeo, a made man, saw Richard as a threat.
They were at the Gemini Lounge in Brooklyn. They're all yucking it up, and they're drinking and they're eating, and all of a sudden, Tomato's face changes, and he's scowling, and he pulls out an Uzi, submachine gun, and he points at Kuklinski, and he says, "What's so funny, Polak? You want to die today? You want to die today?" And Richard just put down his fork and he said, "It's all in your hands, Roy." And he just threw down the machine gun and kept eating.
In 1981, Maskey was the owner of a general store in southern New Jersey. Kuklinski promised Maskey that he could supply him with a hot new commodity, videotapes, at a bargain price. They set up a deal, date, and location, but Kuklinski never showed. While Maskey wondered what went wrong, Kuklinski sat back and let his plan unfold. Kuklinski stood Maskey up 3 more times. Finally, on July 1st, 1981, he met Maskey in northern New Jersey. The store owner brought with him nearly $100,000 to complete the deal for the videotapes. Maskey never returned home. His car was found 3 days later.
No evidence of foul play at that time. And Mr. Maskey was gone, and the money was gone. So for all intents and purposes, he was a missing person.
We got in the car, and then there were just men everywhere, with rifles on the hood, at my window, at his window.
The cops cuffed the massive Kuklinski. The killer seemed resigned to his fate, until he saw his wife also being put into cuffs.
He just went berserk. He was able to lift himself up and push some of us off until we were able to come back down and complete the arrest. But he was that strong. He was that strong of a guy.
Kuklinski was finally secured and taken into custody. He was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. In January of 1988, Kuklinski went on trial for the murders of Gary Smith and Danny Deppner. The other murders were separated into another trial. The saggy clothes and awkward appearance made Richard a prime target for bullies.
There was a boy who taunted him constantly, and the kid would call Richard, hey Polak, what are you doing? Where are you going? What are you doing?"
The taunting turned physical, as the bully and his friends dished out frequent beatings. On a frigid winter night, he devised a plan to exact revenge. He knew that in the evening, after school, his tormentor would cross the courtyard outside his apartment building. He removed the rod from his family's soul closet.
The kid shows up by himself, and he sees that Richard's holding the pole. And he says, "What are you going to do with that, Polak?" And Richard, out of nervousness, swings at him, hits him in the head, knocks him down. Now he's more scared than ever. He loses track of what he's doing, and he's just beating him, and he kills him.
In 1986, after 3 years of gathering information, the New Jersey Attorney General's office initiated a multi-agency task force to go after the Iceman. It included prosecutor Bob Carroll, FBI agent Paul Smith, and ATF agent Dominic Polifrone. Polifrone's specialty was undercover work. The undercover agent talked up his connections, and Kuklinski finally took notice. Polifrone wore a wire.
I just have a few problems I want to dispose of. I have some rats I want to get rid of. Yeah. The only thing I don't understand, don't you use a piece of iron to get rid of these people? Use this cyanide? Why be messy? You do it nice and calm.
Polifrone saw his chance. The incriminating tapes on Kuklinski were damaging, but the cops wanted to make sure their case was rock solid. They developed a scheme that had Iceman written all over it. Polifrone approached Kuklinski about a murder for hire. Agent Paul Smith would play the clueless victim.
We set it up so that Richard looked at it as a possibility to do an easy hit and make a lot of money.
Kuklinski played right into the task force hands. With Kuklinski on board for the hit, the trap was ready to snap shut. they'd finally be able to take the Iceman off the streets for good. The exchange of the fake cyanide went smoothly, and the parties went their separate ways. After Kuklinski returned home, the authorities were ready to take down the Iceman. Kuklinski, however, had made a pickup. His wife, Barbara.
We got in the car, and then there were just men everywhere, with rifles on the hood.
Police informed Mazgay's wife that they found her missing husband. In turn, she shared a valuable piece of information. On the day he disappeared, her husband was heading to meet a man named Richard Kuklinski. It wasn't the first time cops heard the name. Kuklinski had begun to pop up as a person of interest in other murders as well.
But we didn't have a lot of specific information. We had RK, we had the big guy, a lot of different things that pointed towards Richard Kuklinski, but nothing that said that Richard Kuklinski killed this guy.
The detectives paid Kuklinski a visit.
Richard was very cordial, and then said, "If you want to speak to me in the future, I'll meet you somewhere. Don't ever come to my home again."
To bring down the Iceman, the cops would need to get much closer. In the early 1980s, Richard Kuklinski embarked on a series of brutal murders across northern New Jersey. The cops discovered many of his victims: George Malaband, Gary Smith, Danny Deppner, but didn't know who was responsible.
He never followed a pattern, which made him even more dangerous.
But one of Kuklinski's kills would shock even veteran investigators and lead them directly to the Iceman. A body had been found wrapped in plastic. It was identified as that of Louis Masgay, owner of a general store in New Jersey. He'd been shot twice in the head, and the corpse looked fresh. Detectives were shocked to find that Masgay had been missing for more than 2 years.
When they did the autopsy, then they found the body, they find crystal. They find ice tissue in his body.
Someone had killed Masgay and then kept his body on ice for 2 years. Kuklinski opted to forego the proceedings and plead guilty to the murders.
And did you cause his death? Yes. And how did you do that? I shot him with a shotgun.
The judge asked, how'd you kill the individuals? And he said, I shot one in the back of the head and I shot the other 3 times. And the judge asked why, and he said, strictly business.
After the trial, Kuklinski took an unprecedented step and opened up about his murderous ways. He granted several interviews to the media. His most startling claim was that he killed over 100 men.
Richard's body count is a hotly contested issue. Just as he needed to have money in his pocket to be somebody, once the press started paying attention to him, he needed more murders to make himself greater.
The other murders were separated into another trial. Prosecutor Bob Carroll's case began with the audio tape confessions recorded by Agent Dominic Polifrone.
When you hear a tape recording where he's talking to someone openly, friendly, about terrible things, you know he's intending on killing this person, okay? It's very sobering.
In 25 years, I never heard Richard talk like that. Never. I thought he was a coward because of what he did to me.
The shock of hearing Kuklinski on tape also affected the jury. After just 4 hours of deliberation, they found the 53-year-old guilty of killing both Smith and Deppner. He received 2 consecutive life sentences. Facing another trial for the murders of George Malaband and Louis Masgay. September 1983. A warm fall afternoon on a rural highway near Spring Valley, New York. Cop cars lined the road. City workers had found a large mass wrapped in dark plastic. It was shaped like a body. The police peeled back the plastic and uncovered a bound corpse. Apparent cause of death, 2 bullets to the head.
The first thing that they found was that the body was pretty much intact. It had not decomposed a great deal.
It appeared the man had been recently killed and disposed of. But when the coroner's office examined the body, they found something they didn't expect.
The pathologist is feeling around and he hears crunching around the heart. And he sees there's ice crystals around the heart. And it's like, it's summertime. How did this happen?
On March 5th, 2006, after 18 years in state prison, 70-year-old Richard Kuklinski passed away due to natural causes. For authorities, it was the closing chapter in the story of one of the most evil killers in New Jersey history.
He's a completely isolated example of a sociopath like we've never faced before.
The way he killed, the reasons he killed, his absolute asocial cold-bloodedness make him unique.
He's the only guy that I know can walk on coals burning and it wouldn't affect him. If that's not the devil, I don't know who it is.
I wished him dead probably every day for 25 years. And if I could have done it, I probably would have, but I couldn't.
Kuklinski attempted to dispose of the body in a 55-gallon drum, but the 300-pound Malaban wouldn't fit.
Kuklinski had to sever his tendons behind his knees and his arms and so forth to be able to fold him to get him in the drum.
Kuklinski disposed of the body and took the loss, paying off DeMeo out of his own pocket. George Malaband had crossed the line.
Someone froze this body for some reason, and for a long time. The fact that someone would have taken that level of care in storing the body was somewhat frightening.
The police, he says, we're dealing with an Iceman here.
The frozen corpse was authorities' first glimpse into the ice-cold world of one of the country's most prolific and sophisticated murderers, Richard Kuklinski, a.k.a. the Iceman. Richard had met mob associates Percy House, Gary Smith, and Danny Deppner. Richard and the crew had moved on to stealing Corvettes. But on December 17, 1982, police had enough evidence to arrest House for multiple counts of theft, and a warrant was issued on Smith and Deppner.
So he had to figure, I got to get rid of this whole crew.
A day after the bust, Kuklinski ordered Smith and Deppner to stay put at a cheap motel in North Bergen, New Jersey. He let them sit around all day, then finally arrived, a sack of hamburgers in hand. He passed the burgers around, and the hungry men each dug in. Within seconds, Smith began to violently choke.
Kuklinski laced the hamburgers with cyanide.
To finish him off, Kuklinski ordered Deppner to strangle him with a lamp cord. Kuklinski prepared a beef stew for Deppner. It was his last meal. Percy House was nowhere to be found. On a trip to California, he found the target especially sorry for his sins.
He had a contract to kill this individual, and when he cornered the guy, the man said, "Please, God, don't kill me. Don't let him kill me." And he was pathetic.
Richie says, you're a God-fearing, God-loving man. I'll tell you what I do. You got a half hour. Pray to God. If he comes down and pardons you, I'll leave. He had that guy for a half hour. Pray. 31 minutes later, he put a bullet in his head and walked out. Because God didn't come down, he said. He liked killing people. How they died, watching them struggle, watch them squirm. He felt the joy to that.
In a pool hall, he was hustling another guy. The guy figured out that he was being taken, and a fight ensued.
It was a one-sided affair. Kuklinski used the tool of his trade, a pool cue, to rain down blows until the man's blood ran red in the alley.
He was an anger killer at that point. He spoke in vague terms of road rage incidents. People would tick him off. When someone would cut him off on the highway, he'd chase them down, run them off the road, start a fight, and beat and kill them there.
Richard Kuklinski was a stone-cold, without-conscience killer.
Richard is a self-contained, lethal animal.
Everyone was afraid of him. You looked in his eyes and you had to be afraid.
He appeared to have a normal family life, yet he would enter into this dark universe where he would be moving from murder plot to murder plot, killing people.
He would hurt you in a minute. That's his world. He controls. He rules. You don't like, you die. If that's not the devil, I don't know who it is.
Loses track of what he's doing, and he's just beating him, and he kills him.
Terrified, Richard ran back to his apartment and hid the closet rod. He waited days for the police to find him out.
By the third day, it rains, and he looks out the window, and he can see that the chalk outline is draining away. It's disappearing. And he said, that's when I knew that murder was a way to solve my problems. DeMeo, with his hair-trigger temper, goes to Kuklinski and says, look, you introduced me to George Malaband. He owes me money. If he doesn't pay, you have to pay.
As they drove back from the meeting, Kuklinski urged Malaband to pay up.
Malaband tries to hem and haw, and he says, don't get pushy with me, Richie. I know where you live. I've been to your house. Kuklinski reaches into his jacket, pulls out a .38, and he pumps 5 bullets into Malaband's side. You do not even think that you could get to his family.
I would move heaven, hell, and anything in between to get to you. You wouldn't be safe anywhere if I was mad at you. And that's not bull, Dip, that's truth. I've went up against people. You could pull a gun on me, and if I'm mad at you, I'm coming forward. You'd have to shoot me to stop me. And if you don't kill me, you're stupid. Because the next time you see me, I will kill you. I believe I tempted her to do it. I gave her a knife and told her, here's a chance you'll never get again, or something like that. And I turned around. Now she had a chance. She didn't do anything. She dropped on the floor and walked away. And I left the house.
There was a stabbing between your parents, wasn't there?
Yes, there was.
What room was that in?
I don't remember.
What happened?
I don't remember. I don't know. Stanley stabbed Anna. Why, I don't recall. I don't remember what it was all about, but I remember it did happen, yeah.
Stabbed her in the back?
Yeah.
And here you are inviting Barbara to do that to you.
Stupid, wasn't it?
But there have been people you've been good to, aren't there?
Not many. There have been people. I don't know what you consider good. Your interpretation of good might be different than mine. I don't know. What do you mean good?
Well, how do you think you were with your kids?
Oh, the kids. Now you're talking completely different. Now you're talking black and white. There was nothing I wouldn't do for my children. Nothing. I'd kill everybody in this room for them. That's just to show you a point. Not that I would or want to, I'm just saying I would. If it meant I had to for them, I would do it without even thinking twice. It might upset me, it might hurt me, but I would do it. I beat a guy to death one time. I had blood in my shoes. His blood in my shoes. It just goes on that way. Had to throw all my clothes away. Yeah, I was driving a big Lincoln Town car with butt naked. Had a sheet wrapped around me. We're having too much fun. You know that? You realize that? I'm coming across like a nice guy. Nobody's gonna believe this. Nobody. I wouldn't believe this if I was watching this. Because I'm the furthest thing from a nice guy. I am what you call a person's nightmare. Because of the way I project myself, people think they can get by. And then all of a sudden, when they wake up, it's too late. They already hit the stop sign. And that's a dead stop. I am probably the loneliest person in the world because I have nothing I care for, and I can't make any friends to have any kind of a relationship, so I've lost everything. I've lost everything I ever cared for, everything I ever wanted. It's down the toilet. Since there is no love in my life, I must have something to replace it, so I replace it with hate. Constant hate. Constant reminder to hate.
What's that do for you?
Keeps my left foot going in front of my right foot. Keeps me moving. Without it, I would probably just plop down someplace and have no reason to continue.
Is that all you've got left is hate?
That's all I've got left. Everything that I ever cared for is gone. Everything I ever liked is gone. Everything that meant anything to me is gone. So hate.
That's all you started with, too.
Then I've come full circle. It's time for me to die.
In his sessions with psychiatrist Dr. Dietz, he revealed that some of his clients wanted his victims to suffer before they died.
I used to have a thing where I would take somebody into a cabin or cave, whatever you want to call it, and I would tie them up or tape them, their hands and their feet together, and then I would leave them there, and I'd leave a camera on, and rats used to eat them. Rats used to kill these people.
The other thing that I think is true about you is another personality style, where I think it's fair to say that you've got the features of what we call a paranoid personality disorder. The general rule for someone who is paranoid is to trust no one, let no one get too close to you, and to never forgive anyone who does you wrong. If somebody criticizes them, they're quick to respond with anger or to counterattack. If somebody humiliates them, then they must have revenge. About 1 to 2% of the population has the paranoid personality disorder. About 2 to 3% of males and 1% of females have the antisocial personality disorder. And then there's a smaller group that has both. And it was having both that allows you to have this career that you've had.
I appreciate you taking the time and explaining this to me.
Well, why don't we turn the tables here and you interview me? I'll answer your questions.
Interesting. I can live with that. Just so happens I might have a question for you. What do you think about me? Anything good, bad, or indifferent?
Yeah, some of each. There are 2 types of personality features that you have a great deal of. The first of them is called antisocial personality disorder. Someone who does not have a conscience, does not have remorse, does not feel a sense of guilt about most of the bad things they do, is impulsive and violent. But if you raise a kid the way Stanley raised you, with no love, no affection, constant abuse, beatings for no reason, all you teach is hatred, you make it impossible for that child to grow up and form strong attachments. So I think you got to be this kind of antisocial psychopathic person, both by getting Stanley's genes and having Stanley's parenting. Why did you decide to talk to me?
Well, basically, I think I decided to talk to you would be so I could find out more about myself, since I don't know the answers, and you are a person who is highly qualified to give me answers, possibly, of what's going on. I figured this would be a good time to talk to somebody like you, or you know.
basically, I mean, in the eyes of the law, certainly in the eyes of God, you're responsible to wake up in the morning and realize what I had done, and with a clear mind and all my essential moral and ethical feelings intact at that moment. Absolutely horrified that I was capable of doing something like that.
You really hadn't known that before?
There is just absolutely no way to describe the sensation of of reaching that point where I knew that it was like something had, say, snapped, that I knew that I couldn't control it anymore, that these barriers that I had learned as a child, that had been instilled in me, were not enough to hold me back with respect to seeking out and harming somebody. I want people to understand this too, and I'm not saying this gratuitously because it's important people understand this, that basically I was a normal person.
In the early days, you were nearly always about half drunk when you did these things, is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Was that always true?
I would say that was generally the case, almost without exception.
All right, if I can understand it now, there's this battle going on within. There are the conventions that you've been taught. There's the right and wrong that you learned as a child. And then there is this unbridled passion fueled by your plunge into hardcore violent pornography. And those things are at war with each other.
Yes.
And then with the alcohol diminishing the inhibitions, you let go.
Well, yes, and
would it be accurate to call that a frenzy, a sexual frenzy?
well, yes, that's one way to describe it. A compulsion, a building up of this destructive energy. Another factor here that I haven't mentioned is the use of alcohol. But I think that what alcohol did, in conjunction with, let's say, my exposure to pornography, was alcohol reduced my inhibitions. At the same time, the fantasy life that was fueled by pornography eroded them further. I wasn't some guy hanging out at bars or a bum, or I wasn't a pervert in the sense that, people look at somebody and say, I know there's something wrong with him, and just tell. I mean, I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent and very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret, very close to myself, and didn't let anybody know about it.
Ted, after you committed your first murder, what was the emotional effect on you? What happened in the days after that?
Well, again, please understand that even all these years later, it's very difficult to talk about it, and reliving it through talking about it is difficult to say the least. But I want you to understand what happened. It was like coming out of some kind of horrible trance or dream. I can only liken it to after, I don't want to over-dramatize it, but to have been possessed by something so awful and so alien, and then the next morning wake up from it.
Ted, it is about 2:30 in the afternoon. You are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock if you don't receive another stay. What is going through your mind in these last few days?
Well, I won't kid you to say that it's something that I feel that I have control of, or something that I've come to terms with, because I haven't. It's a moment-by-moment thing. Sometimes I feel very tranquil, and other times I don't feel tranquil at all. What's going through my mind right now is to use the minutes and hours that I have left as fruitfully as possible and see what happens. It helps to live in the moment in the essence that we use it productively. So right now I'm feeling calm, and in large part because I'm here with you.
Do you remember what pushed you over that edge? Do you remember the decision to go for it? Do you remember where you decided to throw caution to the wind?
Again, when you say pushed, I know what you're saying. I don't want to infer again.
I understand that.
That I was some helpless kind of a victim, and yet we're talking about an influence that is the influence of violent types of media and violent pornography, which was an indispensable link in the chain of behavior, the chain of events that led to the behaviors, to the assaults, to the murders, and what have you. It's a very difficult thing to describe.
Let's go back then to those roots. First of all, you, as I understand it, were raised in what you consider to have been a healthy home.
Absolutely.
You were not physically abused. You were not sexually abused. You were not emotionally abused.
No, in no way. And that's part of the tragedy of this whole situation, is because I grew up in a wonderful home with two dedicated and loving parents, one of 5 brothers and sisters. A home where we as children were the focus of my parents' lives, where we regularly attended church. We had 2 Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. I'm not saying this was Leave It to Beaver.
It wasn't a perfect home.
No, I don't know that such a home exists, but it was a fine, solid Christian home.
For the record, you are guilty of killing many women and girls.
Yes, that's true.
Ted, how did it happen? Take me back. What are the antecedents of the behavior that we've seen? So much grief, so much sorrow, so much pain for so many people. Where did it start? How did this moment come about?
That's the question of the hour. Is there enough time to explain it all? I don't know. I think I understand it, though. I understand what happened to me, to the extent that I can see how certain feelings and ideas developed in me to the point where I began to act out on them. Certain very violent and very destructive feelings. And part of the shock and horror for my dear friends and family years ago when I was first arrested was that there was no clue. They looked at me and they looked at the all-American boy. And I wasn't perfect, but I want to be quite candid with you. I was okay. The brutal urge to do that kind of thing, and then what happens is once it has been more or less satisfied and recedes, you might say, or spent, that sense, that kind of energy level recedes, and basically I became myself again. Humanity and basic spirit that God gave me was intact, but unfortunately became overwhelmed at times. And people need to recognize that it's not some kind of those of us who have been so much influenced by violence in the media, in particular pornographic violence, are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands. And We grew up in regular families, and pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today.
By the early 1980s, Richard Kuklinski was a ruthless contract killer for the New York mob, a profession he hid from his family.
I had an idea that he was a wholesale distributor. He had cards, he had a business, he had an accountant, the whole 9 yards.
Kuklinski was bringing in tens of thousands of dollars per mafia hit, and he'd just found a new partner, Robert Prongay, aka Mr. Softy. The pair met on a hit ordered by Roy DeMeo and shared an interest in the finer points of murder.
He found the cue to his 007. Just as Q had all the neat gadgets for James Bond, Robert Prongay had all the neat methods that Richard then put into practice.
You kept a photo album. Why?
2 reasons, really. One was to help me remember what I'd done, exactly what had happened, what he looked like, for my own pleasure. We'll look at photos later on. And another one was so next time I got a boy home, I could show him pictures of Lee hanging in the closet, and then I'd kill that boy. I first started exposing myself when I was 13 years old. My first contact with police came when I was 15. On March 10th of 1977, I was arrested by the Richland Police Department here in Washington. I confessed to 6 or 7 different crimes. I couldn't remember for sure. So these 7 cases probably involved close to 20 kids.
For 30 minutes, Dodd described molesting children from one end of the state to another, getting caught, confessing, and walking away a free man. He said he should have been in prison in 4 different places at the time he was killing the 3 little boys. The story was absurd, blaming his murders on those who failed to stop him. And it was hard to believe that so many authorities had let him get away.
They suggested that I get counseling, but didn't think anything was serious enough to press charges. And that was it, it was dropped. Was found guilty of attempted unlawful detainment. I had already been in jail. By the time I got to sentencing for that, I'd already been in jail for 118 days, which is beyond what they normally give for that kind of a crime. So I was released.
I remember just being sick when our judge, who is a good, thoughtful judge who was making a legal decision that I'm sure he felt, he had to make. I didn't agree with it. I don't always agree with judges, but it just made me sick.
The judge, Stephen Riley, has retired. He declined comment. Free again, Dodd headed west for Seattle.
Moved to Seattle on June 13th, 1987. I tried to kidnap a boy. My intentions at that point were to kidnap him, to rape him, and to kill him so that he couldn't report me. This boy knew what to do. He knew something was wrong, he wouldn't go with me, and he made an excuse to leave the area, and he went home. He was able to identify me, and I was arrested that night.
We retraced his 15-year trail of abused kids and discovered that he was telling the truth. In his early 20s, Dodd had moved to Lewiston, Idaho, just across the border from Washington. He molested a little boy there several times on both sides of the state line. He confessed to it in both states.
Idaho sentenced me to 10 years in prison, but the sentence was commuted to 1 year in the county jail, and I served only 4 months of that. So I did 4 months of a 10-year sentence. Everybody over there is pointing fingers at each other. The judge is saying, well, he made such a good impression.
I can recall he made a good appearance in court. He was a kind of a humble kid, and he appeared to be a reasonably bright kid.
Judge John Maynard is retired now. He is haunted by the Wesley Dodd case. He says he can't understand how it happened, how he let such a man go. The most startling thing about Wesley Dodd is how ordinary he seems. Small and harmless looking. The handcuffs seem unnecessary. He speaks in a matter-of-fact voice about unspeakable things.
You must have discovered something about yourself in the last 2 years that you've been in here. What is it? What should people know about you?
I don't know. I can't really say I really discovered much about myself. I think really the biggest thing is that everything could have been prevented. I've had so many contacts with police and confessed to so many crimes and never been charged.
His sexual fantasies and his plans merged. He would murder his victims to avoid arrest, and the prospect of murder became exciting.
And I just became completely obsessed with it. That's all I thought about 24 hours a day. I was dreaming about it at night, constantly all day at work. That's all I thought about, was killing kids.
In September 1989, two young boys disappeared, riding their bikes in a Vancouver, Washington park. They were found later in the day, stabbed to death.
Justin last saw his little brother.
The following month, a 4-year-old boy disappeared from a nearby playground.
Right to this spot.
His body was found 3 days later beside a Vancouver lake. 2 weeks after that, a child began screaming in this movie theater. A man was trying to kidnap him. The man was arrested. He was 28-year-old Wesley Dodd of Richland. He confessed to murdering the 3 children. He said he had hoped to kill many more.
The baby died here at Children's Hospital from traumatic head injuries. Police tell us the father was watching the child when their family dog defecated on the floor. Police say he became enraged, began violently kicking the dog. Then the baby began crying, and they say he shook her until she vomited and passed out. The child died 2 days later. Davis was arrested for homicide, was held without bond. He claims it was an accident, that the baby slipped out of his hand. But a forensic pathologist and the Erie County District Attorney are not buying the story.
We would not be filing a general charge of homicide if this was an accidental dropping, if this was a one slap, if this was a case where somebody banged its head lightly on whatever surface may be involved, or whatever excuse we've heard in the past.
Davis also charged with cruelty to animals after kicking the dog so violently it caused massive internal injuries and the dog died.
It appears that this had been planned for weeks, that these 2 individuals had planned this senseless murder of this 15-year-old for weeks.
Entrican says that one suspect, who he would not identify, confessed to burying Stone in a shallow grave, then moving his body to a freezer. Stone's body was found at the house of 19-year-old Nathaniel Lee. Lee is charged with murder along with 22-year-old Troy Smiley. Both are from Attala. Both were neighbors of Stone, and the DA explained why Stone was targeted.
Within the last couple of weeks, they narrowed it down to somebody that was an easy target.
Harp and Entrican say both suspects were persons of interest from the beginning.
When police showed up on this street in Corrine Township this morning, they walked into a scene that quickly went out of control.
And you couldn't even see the house just because of all the smoke and everything. It was so wild.
When police arrived on Sacramento, they found a man outside a house armed with a weapon.
He had an assault rifle.
He ran from police, went back inside, then came out and gave up.
He surrendered without any further incident.
Smoke was spotted coming from the house. When police went inside, they found 3 victims. All of them had been shot. 2 died at the scene. A third was taken to the hospital and died later. Police think the fire was set when the man went back inside and the blaze raged out of control.
I mean, you can see the flames coming out over the top of the other house next to it and everything.
As investigators work to piece this case together, neighbors are left reeling from such a tragedy in their neighborhood.
Like I said, it's just tragic, man, hearing that, it's in the neighborhood and it's a family. Seeing something like that is wild.
Neighbors tell us they didn't have any reason to think something like this would happen here. In Corrine Township, Andrew Setters, News 5.
There is no way to prepare for the horror contained in that box. Some standard police photos of crime scenes. The lakeside where one body was found. The park where Dodd found 2 boys, molested 1, and stabbed both to death. His home, where he killed a 4-year-old boy. The theater, where he tried to grab another victim and was caught. And there are diaries, meticulous handwritten notes and diagrams as Dodd planned and carried out the murders. He wrote of a wounded child pleading, I'm sorry, before Dodd stabbed him again. Another entry says, I think I got more of a high out of killing than molesting, and I must find another child. His briefcase with the next child's underpants. And finally, a little photo album Dodd kept of that killing. The 4-year-old named Lee, kidnapped from a park and taken to Dodd's home.
This stuff, the slasher movies that you're talking about, that stuff is, I'm telling you, from personal experience, the most, that is graphic violence on screen. Particularly as it gets into the home to children who may be unattended or unaware that they may be a Ted Bundy who has that vulnerability to that predisposition to be influenced by that kind of behavior, by that kind of movie, that kind of violence. There are kids sitting out there switching the TV dial around and come upon these movies late at night, or I don't know when they're on, but they're on and any kid can watch them. It's scary when I think what would have happened to me if I had seen. It was scary enough.
A Brooklyn man faces murder and criminal possession of a weapon charges in connection with the dismemberment of a woman. Police say when they responded to a 911 call from 53-year-old Salah Al-Mawalid Sunday night, they found the dismembered body of a woman inside a Coney Island home. Police say he told them he had been drinking and killed someone. Al-Mawalid was taken into custody and given a psychiatric evaluation. Family and friends have identified the woman as 27-year-old Jessica Gudici. They say Al-Mawalid is a livery driver who used to pick her up all the time and may have been infatuated with her.
It was a cold December morning in 1986 when Richard Kuklinski, arguably one of America's most notorious contract killers, was arrested outside his home in New Jersey. He was employed by the mafia to dispose of problem individuals. He would always kill if the price was right. Murder was his profession, and he made an art of it. On discovering the frozen corpse of one of his victims, police dubbed this ruthless killer the Iceman.
There was no place for him to go, so he stopped his car. He was told to get out of the car, and he did not. So he was taken out of the car, and he was placed face down on a street in a position where we thought we were safe. And then I handcuffed him. That guy's big. I did everything I could to get one click on the handcuffs. And later on, I tried to put leg irons on him, and there's no way they would go on. They just wouldn't go on.
Law enforcement authorities have arrested one of the most notorious contract killers in state history. A self-employed Bergen County man is behind bars, charged with 5 murders, and prosecutors are investigating his involvement in dozens more.
This is unwarranted, unnecessary. These guys watch too many movies.
He is such a cold-blooded killer, they call him the Iceman. After being convicted of 2 murders, he confessed to 2 others in court today.
I shot George Malaban 5 times. Louis Masgay on July 1st, 1981. I shot him once in the back of the head.
When the judge asked him why he had killed the 2 men, Kuklinski replied,
It was due to business.
Dominic Polifrone's tapes had nailed Kuklinski, but in court, the Iceman greeted the undercover cop with a smile.
Just within the past hour or so, a former Portland firefighter is found guilty of killing his 90-year-old grandmother. 56-year-old David Gall beat and strangled his mother, Junette Gall, inside her Hazeldale home last year. She took out a restraining order against that man just hours before her death. Gall will be sentenced later this month.
the drug charge me. Do you know they charge niggas for things that they do every day? Where's our
Wrapped in a yellow tarp, that's Audie Sanchez being wheeled off in a stretcher, yelling for her baby.
The suspect actually admitted to killing the child, so that's when she was taken into custody.
When police got to her home off of Wayside near Vance Jackson around 5 this morning, the 33-year-old mother was sitting on the couch saying she had killed her son, Scott Buckholz Sanchez, because the devil told her to. The baby boy had been decapitated and partially cannibalized.
The 33-year-old mother was then brought right here to University Hospital for a psych evaluation and to be treated after stabbing herself in the chest and the stomach. Police also want to collect new evidence from this mother, who now faces capital murder charges.
Girl in Queens is set on fire in a voodoo ritual, and her mother and grandmother are accused of doing it. Prosecutors say they poured an accelerant over the girl, set her on fire, and then refused to get her medical attention for 24 hours. Both women are facing charges of assault and endangering the welfare of a child. The girl was treated for second and third degree burns and placed in foster care.
On a block that seems so normal, a string of events almost too sad to believe. Just after 10 p.m. last night, emergency crews rushed out to a fire on Galena Court. What they found was a house full of kids.
The firemen and the policemen that carried them out were just running as fast as they could, but there was no energy in the kids' bodies at all.
They looked lifeless.
Very much so.
4 children ages 3 to 9 were badly hurt. 16-month-old Ashia Joseph was declared dead on the scene. Police caught her mother, Maria Joseph, a block away.
We do believe there's enough information based on the investigation at this stage to charge her with the death of the one child.
What could have happened? Neighbors could only speculate about Joseph's husband, Simeon, who killed himself at the very same home last October.
They just kind of withdrawn in the house. They wouldn't come out as much.
Simeon Joseph, it turns out, killed himself the day he lost his job, and Maria had struggled ever since. A lost job, a lost spouse, and now a lost little girl.
Tony Solino's plan had finally come to fruition. Mickey Spillane's top 3 enforcers were all dead.
Joseph Sullivan systematically took out the upper echelon of the organization of Mickey Spillane. Without Joe Sullivan, the Genovese crime family could not have made the inroads into the criminal rackets on the west side like the Jacob Javits Convention Center.
After the Greek, Sullivan says he carried out up to 8 more hits, but won't share details for fear of further prosecution. Joe's boss called with another assignment. Take out Mickey Spillane's last remaining top enforcer, Tom the Greek Kapatos. For weeks, Joe stalked his mark. He memorized the Greek's routine.
Kapatos goes to pay the doorman to watch if anybody was on the streets before he stepped out, unless You were walking the dog.
Sullivan came up with the idea of going for a walk with his dog that would bring him close enough to Capados to do the hit.
January 27, 1977, 6:15 a.m. Joe Sullivan walked his dog Duke with a .38 in his pocket, but just as Joe was closing in on his target,
Duke decides to take a crap. I said, oh my God, come on, Duke.
Joe yanked on Duke's leash.
He sees him yanking away. That's when the old man, his instincts kicked in.
Capados saw the commotion and began to flee.
That's when I lifted up. Boom, boom. Go for the mass, you know? Bang. I run up to the guy. He was dead.
August 20th, 1976, Hell's Kitchen. Early that afternoon, Joe headed to the Sun Bright Saloon, where he knew Comiskey hung out. He wore the same Hispanic makeup used in the Devaney hit. Comiskey was in the bar drinking with his friends. Joe walked in, watched, and waited. He made his move while Comiskey laughed with his buddies.
He said, that was a good time. I don't know if we'll get a chance to do that again. Because any day somebody may walk in here and blow my brains out.
Joe Sullivan was that somebody. The top two enforcers for the Irish mob were now gone. Joe's next hit would open the door for a mafia takeover of Hell's Kitchen and solidify his reputation as a mad dog. Fat Tony Salerno needed to get rid of the West Side Irish mob boss, Mickey Spillane. The first step, take out Spillane's top three enforcers. Joe's first ever assignment was to murder Spillane's top gunman, Tommy Devaney, a hit Sullivan carried out with cool efficiency. On that hot summer day in a Midtown Manhattan bar, Joe Sullivan was about to break a cardinal rule. Sullivan had admitted he was the hitman who took out Mickey Spillane's enforcers, and word got back to the top Genovese mobsters, including John Sullivan.
He was almost folding them out. Nuts. He says, I've been trying to keep you under the radar, and you go over there and tell them you're killing everybody. He says, Joe, you gotta lay low for a while. Go on home to Queens.
Until then, Sullivan had been a valuable asset for the Genovese crime family.
Mad Dog, he was their go-to guy if they wanted to do a hit that insulated them from blame. Where they couldn't be traced back to them, they'd hire somebody like Joe Sullivan. When you start shooting your mouth off, that setup goes by the boards.
How the hell could I make a mistake like that? Something that was almost like a death wish, like I did it purposely without being conscious.
In the late 1970s, a full-blown war was underway in New York City between Italian and Irish mobsters. Freelance hitman Joe Sullivan was in the thick of it, carrying out more than a dozen murders for the Genovese crime family. The most prominent victims on his hit list were the three top enforcers in the Irish mob. Tommy Devaney, blown away while sitting in a bar. Eddie the Butcher Comiskey, who took a shot to the head. And Tommy the Greek Capados, who went out for an early morning stroll and never came back. As Sullivan's body count grew, so did his reputation, earning him the nickname Mad Dog. In April 1980, Joe Sullivan was summoned to a meeting.
John called me, told me, get in here first thing in the morning. We got a big banana to peel.
The big banana was Antonio Caponegro, a.k.a. Tony Bananas. Bananas was the new mob boss in Philadelphia, replacing Angelo Bruno. Bruno had been killed by a shotgun blast to the head as he sat in his car. It was believed Tony Bananas had orchestrated Bruno's murder in a classic mob power grab. But the hit hadn't been sanctioned by New York's Mafia Commission, made up of bosses from the 5 top crime families. The commission had worked closely with Bruno, and now, 1 month after his death, it wanted payback. The Genovese family and Fat Tony Salerno set up the hit. When he was 19, after 6 years in juvenile detention, Joe was set free. He returned to Queens to live with his family, but he was unable to adjust to life outside. He blew through 3 menial jobs in 8 days. After a couple of weeks, he took off, hitchhiking cross country with a friend. But he and his buddy quickly ran out of money, and to get by, began mugging people. One night, Joe went too far and attacked a middle-aged man he didn't know.
I ended up hitting the guy in the head with a hammer. I know he was dead, and he didn't move. That may have been the first guy I killed.
Looking back, Joe realized this killing had been building up inside him.
It was about hatred, anger. It was about my losses in life, and I felt everybody should pay for them.
In 1959, after less than a year on the road, Joe was back home and jobless again. Through a friend, he met an ex-con who said they could raise some easy cash by robbing a bar in New Jersey. But once at the bar, they found the cash drawer had already been emptied for the night. They fled with some money from patrons, but were arrested soon after. For the armed robbery, Sullivan got 5 to 7 years at Trenton State Prison.
Trenton was a tough giant. It was bad everything. Bad guys, bad food, bad hospital treatment. I got stabbed there.
It was survival of the fittest. In October 1965, at the age of 26, Joe was paroled. Joe was also troubled by the fact that he actually liked his intended victim, Jimmy Coonan. But in pursuing this hit, Joe Sullivan was about to break a cardinal rule. Joe's brainstorm was to try to use Featherstone to get to Coonan. He proposed to Featherstone that they team up, the Irish against the Italians.
I says, listen, I says, these f***ing guineas got us all killing each other. I'm killing Comiskey, Devani. I says, why don't we just get together and take everything? I says, all I want to do, I want to sit down with you and with Jimmy.
It was a stunning revelation. Sullivan had admitted he was the hitman who took out Mickey Spillane's enforcers. Featherstone ran immediately to Coonan with the news, and word got back to the top Genovese mobsters, including John Sullivan. He angrily confronted Joe.
He was almost folding him out. Nuts. He says, I've been trying to keep you under the radar, and you go over there telling me killing everybody.
Just as Joe thought his days of being useful to the mob were over, the phone rang. In 1980, after sitting on the bench for 2 years, he was called in on another dangerous mission.
John called me, told me, get in here, we got a big banana to peel.
At the age of 13, Joe was playing in the yard when his aunt casually shouted out the back door that his father was dead. Joe thought it was a cruel joke. He collapsed when he learned it was true. After a brief illness, his father had died of stomach cancer. He was 36.
He was like Superman to me. He ain't supposed to die. I felt cheated. You know, young kid, you're selfish. Felt cheated.
Joe's father was 2 years shy of receiving a pension. Extended family couldn't help, so Joe's mother, Nora, was left alone with 6 mouths to feed. It proved to be too much for the young widow.
His mom became an alcoholic. There was no food in the house. All the goodness that she had just threw out the window, you know.
In May 1976, Joe contacted a fellow ex-con named John Sullivan. Sullivan was the right-hand man for Genovese family acting boss, Fat Tony Salerno. In a meeting at a restaurant near the Coliseum, Joe asked if John could put him to work. The older gangster decided to test him.
Says, see that guy over there? Supposing I pass your gun under the table. And just on your way out, blow his brains out. Says, you got a problem with that? I said, no. That was the beginning.
Delta man accused of killing his 5-month-old daughter back in December has been formally charged. 20-year-old David Beck has been charged with first-degree murder and child abuse resulting in death. He's also facing child abuse charges for allegedly abusing a 2-year-old girl in his care. When Beck's daughter died, doctors say she had severe blunt trauma to the head and neck. Beck is out on bond tonight. He will be back in court later this month.
July 20th, 1976. It was one of those stifling, hot summer mornings in Manhattan. At Dominic's Bar and Grill, an Hispanic-looking man sat alone. In strolled an Irish mobster named Tommy Devaney and 2 of his friends. The Hispanic-looking man glanced at Devaney, returned to his beer,
and carefully wiped his fingerprints off the glass. Gripping a loaded .38, he pushed back from the bar and stepped toward Devaney.
He put the gun to the back of his head and pulled the trigger and blew Devaney's brains out all over the bar.
The gunman calmly walked out and got into a waiting car. Then, wiping brown makeup off his face, he revealed his true identity. 37-year-old mafia hitman, Joe Mad Dog Sullivan.
Joe Sullivan was a mad dog killer from day one. Not only a hitman, he was a serial killer. Everybody was scared to death of this guy.
I'd be lying if I said I didn't like the action, the chase, the excitement.
You learn quickly that either you killed or be killed, and he excelled in that.
25, 30, 35. There was a lot of people. You don't keep count.
I never knew about the murders. I loved my husband. I was naive.
It was a game in the beginning. Then it went to becoming a nightmare. You become a monster. I ended up hitting the guy in the head with a hammer. I know he was dead, and he didn't move. That may have been the first guy I killed.
Those who knew and loved 17-year-old Jessica Kelsey are still shaking their heads in disbelief tonight as her 19-year-old brother sits in the Oakland County Jail awaiting arraignment on a charge of murder. The Oakland County Sheriff and his investigators say they believe the young soldier, home on leave from basic training, stabbed his sister to death sometime after celebrating New Year's Eve with his sister and some other family members and friends at their home on Grant Drive in Highland Township. A backpack and some clothing found on a dumpster at a restaurant in Heartland on New Year's Day gave police a first clue that something was wrong. A waitress said she found bloody knives in the pack, and it's reported the brother's ID was found in it as well. Jessica's mom is the one who found her daughter's body in her bedroom, and hours later, her 19-year-old son was arrested as the prime suspect in the murder. This morning, he was set to go back to boot camp. Now he could be going to prison for the rest of his life if he's convicted on this charge of murder.
By 1965, Joe Sullivan had spent nearly half his life locked up. The brutalities of prison life had taken their toll. Now 26 years old, he was a cauldron of resentment and self-pity. That fall, he began drinking heavily. December 19th, 1965. Joe went on a bender, bar hopping for 8 hours. From another patron, he bought a gun.
All I could think about, my father, the demons within all those years of abuse, and I just got evil. I'm sitting there, and in my mind, I'm going to kill somebody, and I know what I feel it.
A man at the bar recognized Joe as one of the Sullivan boys.
All I could think of was like, you're one of them. My father's so-called friends. Crazy. I just pulled the gun out and shot him in the head. And he never even fell off the stool. He was dead instantly.
Joe took off, headed south, and went on a crime spree. Then came one of those moments in the life of a young man that changes everything. One night, Joe's mother ordered him to go to the neighborhood Willow Bar and Grill to pick up a collection organized by friends of his father.
Just as I was going to get the container, somebody reached in there and took out a couple of quarters for the jukebox. These are my father's friends. Just to see somebody take money out of something that was supposed to go to his friends' children, I felt a real hatred. And I could have killed him then.
With a single, thoughtless act, the floodgates opened on months of pressure, and the altar boy was no more.
That led to him, skipping school, committing crimes, going out and doing the wrong thing with the wrong people.
By 1980, hitman Joe Mad Dog Sullivan was teetering on the edge. In 4 years, he claims to have carried out more than 20 hits for New York's Genovese crime family.
There's a lot of people, a lot of guys. These were guys as bad as I was. Basically, it doesn't make it right. Murder's murder. But it was more like a war. It was a game in the beginning. Then it went to become a nightmare.
An elderly Panama City Beach woman is dead tonight. The elderly woman who was supposed to be her caregiver is in the Bay County Jail tonight, charged with her murder. Bay County Sheriff's investigators arrested 78-year-old Geraldine H. Shockley this afternoon, charging her with an open count of murder. Authorities say Shockley killed 94-year-old Bessie Borth at Borth's Panama City Beach condo on Fairway Boulevard. They say they had already been investigating Shockley after Borth's bank had called them about some irregularities in Borth's account. Then, about 6:15 this morning, Shockley called 911 to report Borth had fallen down some stairs and died. During questioning, investigators say Shockley finally admitted she had pushed Borth down the stairs. When the fall did not kill her, Shockley allegedly smothered Borth with a pillow. Authorities believe Shockley stole thousands of dollars from Borth over the last 3 years. Shockley is now charged with an open count of murder and exploitation of the elderly.
A gruesome discovery for some joggers at a Maryland high school track this morning. A young woman's dead body was found with obvious trauma to the upper body. The body turned up just off the running track at the Forestville Military Academy. That's in Prince George's County. Tonight, police are describing the victim as a petite African-American female in her 20s with a tattoo of a scorpion on the back of her neck.
Right now, like I say again, we don't have an identity of the victim, and we're asking anybody or anyone that may either know this person or who may have heard or seen anything that seemed out of the ordinary that was in this location between last night and early this morning to give us a call here to Prince George's County Police Department.
And neighbors of children at that school say they were surprised to learn about the discovery, saying they don't recall anything like that happening in their neighborhood before.
By 1977, Irish and Italian mobsters were in heated combat for lucrative construction rackets on Manhattan's West Side. In the war, Joe Sullivan had waxed 6 enemies of the Genovese crime family. The hits included a pair of top enforcers for Mickey Spillane's rival Irish mob. But precious little of the spoils of that mob war trickled down to Joe through his mob handler, John Sullivan.
I get like 300 there or 400 a month. Meanwhile, I'm killing people almost every month. I expected to get paid better. And it was always, don't worry, the big money's coming soon. I could never ask. I showed my loyalty.
But money aside, there was more in it for Joe.
I'd be lying if I said I didn't like the action.
Did you know that he was a repeated offender?
No, that was not in his pre-sentence information.
Why?
I have no idea. Nothing in there to indicate that he had a real serious problem.
How could they have missed Dodd's problem? He had been caught all around the state of Washington molesting kids. The Navy had even found out about him and discharged him.
Now, can I get the criminal record of Wesley Dodd?
But Judge Maynard was right, partly. Only a fraction of Dodd's record was reported to him before the sentencing. Even so, that report is full of warnings that something was seriously wrong with Wesley Dodd. A sex crime against another child 2 years earlier. the arrest for indecent liberties in the neighboring town, counseling for molesting a boy 7 years earlier in Richland, unsuccessful counseling because Dodd failed to show up for his appointments.
Mad Dog.
When Joe Sullivan became the force that he was, I believe the people in the neighborhood gave him that name. Everybody was scared to death of this guy, including cops.
Joe has 6, 7 different personalities. Joe could be Joe, and then he could be Sully, and then he could be outright, Joe the killer. He could be anything, whenever he wants. He could be, he can turn himself on and off, Joe.
And the hits kept coming. In 1978, his boss, John Sullivan, called with another contract from the Genovese family, Irish mob leader Jimmy Coonan. But Mad Dog was beginning to grow weary of his profession.
I always used to hear that expression, every man's death diminishes me. I used to laugh at it, but I felt like I was becoming the Grim Reaper.
These men are preparing for release from prison.
Molested and raped 3 to 12-year-old boys.
Oral rape to bestiality.
I'm a sadistic rapist. I like to hurt them more than I actually like to rape them.
Nicknamed the Monster Killer, Yang Zhihai is China's most prolific serial killer. Between 1999 and 2003, he terrorized several provinces, killing 67 people and committing 23 rapes. His method wasn't elegant. He would sneak into homes at night and use any household items he found, knives, axes, shovels, hammers, to kill. He left no witnesses and disguised his appearance by wearing large clothes and shoes while committing his crimes. He confessed to his crimes, saying, "When I killed people, I had a desire to kill more. I don't care whether they deserve to live or not. It is none of my concern." After confessing to his crimes, his trial in 2004 lasted only an hour, and he was executed following his conviction.
Handcuffed with a blue prison uniform on, this 13-year-old with pigtails stood before a juvenile court judge this morning. The teenage girl is accused of stabbing her 33-year-old mother 30 times. We're also learning during the hearing, the court also heard about how deputies found bloodied brass knuckles and a dumbbell that were also used in this violent attack. The girl's mother was taken to the hospital and rushed into surgery. At last check, she was listed in critical condition. Also in court, finding out the girl's father was there to support her. Now the 13-year-old is facing charges.
One of the final murders that you committed, of course, was apparently little Kimberly Leach, 12 years of age. I think the public outcry is greater there because an innocent child was taken from a playground. What did you feel after that? Were there the normal emotions 3 days later? Where were you, Ted? I can't really talk about that right now. It's too painful. I would like to be able to convey to you what that experience is like, but I won't be able to talk about that. Okay. I can't begin to understand. Well, I can try, but I'm aware that I can't begin to understand the pain that the parents of these children that I have, and these young women that I have harmed feel. And I can't restore really much to them, if anything. I won't pretend to, and I don't even expect them to forgive me, and I'm not asking for it. That kind of forgiveness is of God, and if they have it, they have it. If they don't, well, maybe they'll find it someday. Do you deserve the punishment the state has inflicted upon you? That's a very good question. And I'll answer very, very honestly. I don't want to die. I'm not going to kid you. I'll kid you not. I deserve certainly the most extreme punishment society has. I think society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me. That's for sure. I think society deserves to be protected from itself because there are forces that loose in this country, particularly, again, this kind of violent pornography.
Ted Bundy is easily the most famous killer in American history. He became a media sensation in the 1970s due to his charm, good looks, victim profile, which was college-aged women, and managing to break out of jail twice. He's been the subject of several movies, documentaries, and books. He is the chief suspect in 36 murders, but experts believe he killed 100 or more. He often lured his victims to his car, taking them somewhere to rape and bludgeon them to death. He was captured for good in connection to several murders at a sorority, and bite marks on some of the victims matched him definitively. He was executed by electric chair in 1989.
Both men were waiting within feet of Florida's electric chair, only hours before they were scheduled to be put to death. They are two of the nation's most notorious mass killers. Gerald Stano and Ted Bundy together have been linked to nearly 80 murders. The stays of execution, the third for Bundy, the second for Stano, gives them at least 60 more days to try to overturn their death sentences. On this, the 10th anniversary of the Supreme Court's reenactment of the death penalty, state officials say repeated stays by the courts are creating logjams in 38 states that have the death penalty. As of May 1st, 1,714 people are awaiting execution, with the number growing by about 250 a year. So far, 61 prisoners have been executed, but the number is growing each year. More than half of the executions have been in Florida and Texas. Meanwhile, Bundy and Stano have been returned to their regular cells, joining 245 other Florida inmates on death row.
Robert Willie Pickton was a Canadian pig farmer who preyed on sex workers and was nicknamed Pork Chop Rob due to his gruesome method for disposing of his victims, feeding the bodies to his pigs, grinding up the remains, mixing them with ground pork, and selling them to the public. In 2002, police searched the property and discovered the personal items of several missing women, 80 unknown DNA sequences, frozen meat containing the DNA of 2 women, and a gun with a dildo concealing the barrel. Pickton told an undercover police officer that he had killed 49 women and was upset it wasn't an even 50.
The monster of the Andes is no urban legend. For a decade, Pedro Lopez terrorized areas of Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, killing over 300 poor and indigenous young girls. In 1980, he was arrested for trying to kidnap a girl and confessed to the murders of 53 others that he'd strangled and dumped into previous dug graves. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, the maximum in Ecuador, then confessed to killing an additional 240 girls in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. In 1998, he seemed to have vanished. Some believe he was killed in prison, but others say he was released on bail or escaped.
In happier times, 37-year-old Asiya Zubair and her 44-year-old husband Mo Hassan, who founded Bridges TV. Police converge on the station's Orchard Park studio and office.
Yeah, I would say the worst that I've seen.
The victim's husband, who walked into police headquarters here in Orchard Park on Thursday evening to report his wife was dead. It's being called a brutal murder.
She was decapitated, yes.
Zubair was found in a hallway, but according to police, the couple had trouble getting along.
There has been some history. I believe Mrs. Hassan, the victim, had just recently filed for divorce and had served the papers on Mr. Hassan.
Police say Zubair and her husband were parents to 4 children. The marital issues came to light recently with police going to the couple's Big Tree Road home in Orchard Park just last Friday. Apparently, Zubair felt she was in danger.
We had been down there on Friday the 6th to serve down at their house to serve order protection.
Mikhail Popkov was a police officer in Russia by day, moonlighting as a serial killer. He was nicknamed the Werewolf because of how horribly he mutilated the bodies of his victims. Popkov patrolled the streets of Siberia hunting for immoral women who were drunk and behaving frivolously, with the mission to clean the city. He would offer them rides and kill them with whatever he had, including knives, axes, baseball bats, and screwdrivers. Apparently, he was an exemplary family man who loved his wife and daughter, although it's believed he began killing after suspecting his wife of cheating on him. In 2015, he was convicted of killing 22 women, even though he later admitted to more than 80 murders.
A drunk driver killed bicyclist Paul Lecure on this stretch of Old Spanish Trail. How she laughed about it later earned her a much stiffer sentence.
The man who called Melissa Arrington passed on a message from a neighbor designed to cheer her up.
John says, as far as he's concerned, you did the world a favor because you took out a tree hugger, a bicyclist, a Frenchman, and a gay guy all in one shot. He's proud of you. He said, as far as he's concerned, they should give you a medal and parade.
Arrington concedes she's not supposed to be laughing at something like that, but soon she refers back to the crude joke.
I would have to agree, though.
And she says no apparent desire to get help for the illness of alcoholism that led to an earlier DUI conviction for Arrington before the night of drunk driving that made her a killer.
35-year-old Martin Martinez admitted it. He pleaded guilty to killing his mother, his girlfriend, Dr. Amanda Cruz, her 2 daughters, a 6-year-old and 6-month-old, her 2-year-old son, and his niece. Martinez admitted that on July 18, 2015, he entered a home on Nob Hill Court in Modesto. He encountered his 57-year-old mother in the laundry room and stabbed her to death. He then moved throughout the house and found 2 children in the master bedroom where he suffocated 6-year-old Elizabeth and 5-year-old Esmeralda. He then took 6-month-old Rachel from her crib to the kitchen and suffocated her as well. After those 4 murders, he waited for his girlfriend, Dr. Amanda Cruz, to get home. He waited by the door, found her, and stabbed her to death. Martinez pleaded guilty to the 5 counts of murder, along with special circumstance of lying in wait.
911 emergency.
Yes, I need to report a murder. My roommate shot somebody last night and killed the body in the basement.
It was that 911 call that sent Springfield police to 204 North Greenmount Avenue Wednesday afternoon. The caller tells the dispatcher that his roommate confessed to killing 24-year-old Johnny Robert Hyde sometime late Tuesday night. The caller says his roommate, 30-year-old Mark Burwell, wants to turn himself in.
Shoot somebody, man?
Mark Burwell was taken into custody. He has pleaded not guilty to aggravated murder with a death penalty specification. In that 911 call, the roommate talks about a possible motive.
Johnny was trying to steal his Xbox 360, and rather than he just shot him when he was trying to get out the door.
There is an indication it was over the Xbox, but of course that is a statement from the defendant.
The deadliest known serial killer of all time is Louis Garavito, or simply the Beast, believed to have killed over 300 people. He roamed Colombia, preying upon the young, poor, and homeless. Garavito would disguise himself as a monk or a priest to lure boys to his home, promising money or food. The bodies were usually discovered with bite marks on them, and the crime scene was surrounded by bottles of liquor. Garavito confessed to the murders of 140 boys and claimed that his body had been taken over by a superior being. He was sentenced to 1,835 years in prison.
This all started at about 1:30 once police arrived. They thought McCurley was actually still inside the house. After about 45 minutes, they went inside and had seen that he was gone. Investigators at the scene telling me that this all started as a fight between McCurley and his girlfriend.
What we have determined is that her and her boyfriend got into an altercation, at what point he threw some kind of chemical on her body and lit her on fire.
Now, the woman actually came running outside of the house behind me here and put herself out. Neighbors saw what was going on. They called 911. She's taken to a hospital just up the road from here at Hillcrest at the burn center there. She was burned from her neck down with 2nd and 3rd degree burns, 80% of her body. Police telling me she is not in good shape at this hour.
Tonight, Judge Judy Scheinlin filing a lawsuit against the parent company of the National Enquirer and In Touch Weekly, accusing the company of defamation. She says they published a story falsely claiming she was trying to help the Menendez brothers get a retrial nearly 35 years after their parents' murder. She calls the story a fabrication. No comment tonight from the publisher, Accelerate 360 Media.
One of the most infamous American serial killers is John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown. Gacy performed in clown attire at children's parties as his clown alter egos Pogo or Patches, and admitted to wearing his costume while sexually assaulting, torturing, and strangling his victims, primarily young boys, who he would lure to his home. But it wasn't until 1978 that authorities discovered several trenches filled with human remains in the crawl space under his house. Gacy confessed and was convicted of killing 33 people and was executed by lethal injection in 1994.
Tony Banana's bullet-riddled body was found the next day in the Bronx, in the trunk of a car. Money was stuffed into every orifice of his body, a mafia message that it was greed that killed him. Joe says the assassination of Tony Bananas was his last hit for the Genovese family.
That was about the end of me, too, around that time.
Tony Salerno had arranged for a sit-down with the Philly mobster at one of Salerno's hangouts. Sullivan came prepared.
It was a Mac 11, which is 45, with like a 30-round clip, and it had the silencer, which is about that long.
Joe took his place in the shadows. Tony Bananas walked in. Just as he was about to sit down, Joe stepped into the light.
I said, "Hey, Tony, you talk about the guy dying tough. This is amazing. No fear. Came right at me like a runaway rhinoceros. 3 times I hit him. Came right back off the wall."
Sullivan kept firing.
He just slid along the wall, down in the corner, and he's like hissing, like a death rattle. And the guy, I didn't know, lady had $23,000 in his pocket. And then they have the cleanup.
On December 17th, 9 days after the Long Island shootings, Joe ambushed Fiorino just as he was about to go into a restaurant.
He's about 15 feet from the door. I yell, "Fiorino!" He spun around. Ba-boom! I hit him with the first.
Fiorino tried to grab a pistol in his boot.
I was already on top of him. Ba-boom! Finished the night.
Joe fled the scene, but it was snowing heavily. A local cop spotted him driving erratically and gave chase. After a few blocks, Joe crashed his car, then took off on foot, exchanging gunfire with the cop along the way. He hid out in the snow for several hours before slipping out of town. That June, he set his sights on a fellow ex-con named Brian Molise. When Molise became a suspect in a triple murder, Sullivan's name came up in the investigation. He was infuriated when police questioned him about it. Sullivan knew Molise was involved, but rather than talk to the cops, he decided to take out Molise.
I can't rat on him, but I can kill him.
Joe went to Brian's apartment in Manhattan and took an unwitting Gail along as cover. Molise was there with a friend, and while Gail was in another room, Sullivan pulled out his weapon and shot them both. But the gun misfired. As the victims ran from the apartment, Joe grabbed Gail.
He said, "Make sure your fingerprints aren't on anything," and then we just left. We booked, and I knew that was it. It was the end.
On February 22nd, 1982, Sullivan was arrested.
Tom Taylor probably set him up for capture. Taylor got word back to Joe, "Stay put in the motel that you're in." And when they woke up the next morning, there was the FBI surrounding the location.
The FBI said they were acting on a tip when they grabbed Mad Dog just outside the motel. There would be no more running for Joseph Mad Dog Sullivan. He got 25 years to life for the murder of John Fiorino and 75 years to life for the murders of the Long Island drug dealers. At 70 years old, Joe Sullivan knows he'll die in prison. He's not up for parole until the year 2070.
I could cry about a lot of things, but my deepest regret, my wife, my sons, what I've cheated them out of, and the life we could have had. It's something you can't forgive yourself.
Desperate for money, he teamed up with a fellow ex-con named Marco Tedesco. They hatched a plan with 3 users they knew on Long Island. Joe and Marco would rob a pharmacy of a powerful prescription painkiller called Dilaudid. But when Joe and Marco broke into the pharmacy, they found no such drugs. Joe suspected he'd somehow been set up. Joe shot all 3, then turned to Marco.
He always carried a knife. I said, "You're the butcher." I says, "Make sure they're all dead."
Tedesco slashed their throats, but miraculously, one of them survived and ID'd his attackers. Tedesco was quickly arrested, but Joe got out, this time to Rochester, New York.
During a span of just 6 months in 1999, Javed Iqbal murdered 100 runaway boys in Lahore, Pakistan. Javed would lure a boy to his home where he sexually abused him, strangled him, often with a chain, then chopped the body into pieces and dissolved it in a barrel of acid. He kept a detailed journal of his victims. One day, after eluding the police for months, he entered a newspaper office, handed over his journal, and announced that he had killed 100 children. He was convicted of all 100 murders, and the judge sentenced him to be publicly executed in the fashion that he killed his victims. He committed suicide in prison.
A Shelbyville pastor is behind bars, charged with the sodomy and sex abuse of a child less than 16 years old. James Howard Bell.
Printed on the sign of this Shelbyville church, the name of their pastor, James Howard Bell. Bell's congregation will likely be without him this Sunday.
Mr. Bell turned himself in to the Shelby County Detention Center, and that's when we were notified of the complaint. Once we interviewed Mr. Bell, he advised that he had had some sexual encounters with a juvenile.
Trooper Ronald Turley says detectives then went to find the victim. After conducting more interviews, they executed a search warrant at Bell's house and arrested him. Bell was charged with sodomy, sexual abuse, and wanton endangerment. Police say they will not discuss the specifics of the case. Bell is married and has 3 children. Those at the church say they have no comment on the case. Police say despite the comments Bell made himself, their job is far from over.
Police are collecting evidence in 51-year-old Gary Roy's Manchester home. They say he killed 50-year-old Arlene Lapata Houle inside. According to investigators, the 911 call came in just before 6 in the morning. But they say when they arrived here at the scene, they discovered that Roy had killed Lapata Houle at some point the night before.
The 911 call was made by a person who lived in a nearby residence who had obtained information that the woman was in fact deceased.
Lapata Houle lived right across the street. Investigators won't say what prompted the attack.
Megan Sherwin says alcohol played a role in her mother's death. Roy will be arraigned on second-degree murder charges on Monday.
America's first truly infamous serial killer was H.H. Holmes. He was also a con artist and combined these two devilish acts with horrific success in the late 1800s. He got engaged to several women, secured their savings, then killed them and sold their bodies to local medical schools. Craziest of all, in 1893 he opened a hotel for the sole purpose of killing tourists visiting for the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. The murder castle had secret passages and soundproof rooms for torture and killing, trapdoors and chutes, gas jets, and a kiln. Researchers believed he killed over 200 people. He was hanged in 1896. Britain's most prolific serial killer is Harold Shipman, aka Dr. Death. His co-workers grew suspicious of the amounts of morphine he was prescribing and the number of his patients who were passing away of old age, according to him. In 1998, he was caught forging the will of one of his patients, and her natural death was revisited and ruled a homicide. He was convicted on 15 counts of murder, although experts believed he likely killed at least 215 of his patients. In 1999, he was sentenced to life in prison, but in 2004, he hung himself in his cell.
Carl Stotter met Nielsen at the Black Cap, where he agreed to go back to Nielsen's flat.
I fell asleep and I woke up and he was strangling me, and I passed out after sort of thinking. I thought that I'd got caught up in the sleeping bag which he'd warned me about, and I thought he was helping me out, but he wasn't. And anyway, I passed out from that, And I remember vaguely hearing water running and being carried, and I felt very cold, and I realised I was in the bath and he was trying to drown me.
Dennis Nielsen spared Carl's daughter, but at least 15 people weren't so lucky. They paid the ultimate price for Dennis Nielsen's hospitality. He killed them, he chopped up their bodies, and he then burned, boiled, or buried the pieces.
It was about 8 o'clock last night when a family of 6 and their dog showed up on Rita Garvey's porch on Collins Avenue in West Seneca. They all ran there from their home around the corner on Indian Church Road. That's where the father, 31-year-old Corey Cochran, is accused of stabbing his son in the chest. And that was only the beginning.
The mother interceded. She fought with the husband, was able to take the knife away from the husband. The husband apparently then gained access to a second knife. Another struggle ensued. She was able to disarm him with the second knife. She ended up stabbing him several times.
Then the mother was able to get her 4 children together and run down the street. The father even followed them to the house around the corner. But police showed up soon after, arresting him and treating the 6-year-old boy. Dalton Cochran is now in stable condition at Women and Children's Hospital. His mother, Rebecca Cochran, was treated and released from ECMC with wounds to her hands. The father, Corey Cochran, is at ECMC with non-life-threatening injuries.
Once alone, with the door locked, the 10 minutes of terror. Flight tracking data shows the co-pilot changes the autopilot, sending the jetliner down toward the Alps. Outside the cockpit, the captain feels the plane descending. He can be heard on the recording, knocking on the door. No answer. He starts banging as if trying to break down the door. Silence from the co-pilot. But on the recording, Lubitz can be heard, breathing normally. Seconds tick by, the jet dropping more than 3,000 feet a minute, closing in on the mountains in plain view of the passengers. They are heard on the recording too, screaming in the final seconds before the crash. Why couldn't the captain get in? These 2-inch thick, strong doors installed after 9/11. They automatically lock. There is a keypad outside. The pilot in the cockpit, though, has 30 seconds to respond, to override that code and keep the door locked, in this case, for another 5 minutes. That is one of the reasons that the U.S. requires 2 in the cockpit at all times. If a pilot leaves, he's replaced by a relief pilot or flight attendant. After this murderous, evil act in the Alps, airlines are now adopting that 2-person policy.
What detectives discovered in the front yard, possible human remains in a fire pit. The search came after Michael Carlson's recent arrest for the 2003 murder of his sister. Carlson had been living on that property where these possible remains were found.
Investigators believe he burned the bodies, then buried them. This fresh dirt marks the spot where deputies made the gruesome discovery. Investigators consider this man, Michael Carlson, their prime suspect. Right now, he's already in custody on unrelated charges for the murder of his sister. In court documents just obtained by News 4, Carlson has confessed to investigators to shooting and killing Kenneth and Rebecca. He says he did it inside of his Cadillac using a sawed-off shotgun. Then he claims over the next 3 days he burned and dispersed their bodies. We're live from Marana with Balance News. Rebecca Taylor, News 4.
Police triggered an investigation Saturday when 61-year-old Maggie Mamer was reported missing. Her body parts found here, rotting in a plastic storage container. Her roommate, 47-year-old Lisa Gonzalez, is facing a murder charge. Prosecutors say Gonzalez told police she had an argument with Maynor on May 15th. She was trying to evict her. Maynor refused to move out. Gonzalez does not recall what happened next.
As a homicide detective that saw Shawcross's victims firsthand, when I visited the crime scenes and saw how he just left them out there in the open area where they could be eaten by animals, dragged apart, families not knowing where they were, children not knowing where the mothers were. I just think that he's the lowest form of human life, and I personally would have no problem so-called what we call pulling the switch on him. I think that just him sitting in jail and being able to get up in the morning and read a book or eat food is wrong. And I would like to see him dead.
I knew 80 to 100 prostitutes in the city of Rochester. I was told by one girl about one of them having AIDS. And she would tell me which ones that she thought had AIDS. And I was scared. What right is these girls, being a prostitute's one thing. Going on the street, knowing you have the disease, and continue to have sex with, different partners, it's not right. So I went out and I took their life. When I came out of Vietnam, I left on October 31st, Halloween Day. Flew to Japan, then to Anchorage, Alaska, then Seattle, Washington, Chicago, Detroit, Syracuse, back to Watertown, New York. Then I had a problem adjusting. The Army taught you how to kill, didn't teach you how to stop or the desire to do so. I would wake up in the night, somebody would touch me and I'd beat him up. You know, my wife at that time, who was a blonde, blue-eyed girl, I gave her 2 black eyes just for touching me.
Wesley Dodd told police the murder of 4-year-old Lee Isley was sexually motivated.
Dodd's murders were part of a siege of sadistic crimes in Washington, committed by men who had repeatedly been caught, jailed, treated, and released.
Experts say they're frustrated because the problem doesn't seem to be going away.
Prosecutors say 22-year-old Alex Martinez killed his wife Angela Harris on Saturday. Investigators say Martinez slammed her head against the wall of their apartment, then choked her to death. Prosecutors say he then loaded her body into his car to drive to the Hudson Valley. According to court documents obtained by Action News, Martinez's neighbor tells state police he and his friend were working on his car. That's when a man came over and asked for help lifting something into a truck. In those court documents, the neighbor says, quote, the thing he wanted us to lift was in a used off-white colored kids pack and play, maybe 4 feet by 3 feet, and was wrapped in darker colored blankets. The neighbor's friend told police, quote, we all 3 lifted it into the bed of the truck. It was at this point that it seemed extremely heavy to me, a couple of 100 pounds. Both men say they didn't know the man's name.
In March of 1988, the body of a prostitute was discovered in the Rochester area. Over the next several months, the bodies of other prostitutes started turning up, and that resulted in a massive investigation conducted by the Rochester Police Department to try to discover the person responsible.
As late as mid-November, police in Rochester were downplaying growing concern about a possible link among the deaths. Then, a body a week started turning up. In all, police have 12 unsolved murders on their hands.
I knew 80 to 100 prostitutes in the city of Rochester.
2 of the bodies that were discovered were mutilated. One of the bodies was cut from the base of her breastbone down through a pubic area. Another of the bodies that was discovered was mutilated in the vaginal area. There's no question in my mind that Shawcross was responsible for the mutilation.
Samuel Little is the most contemporary killer on this list, and the FBI is still working on identifying a number of his victims. The agency describes Little as the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history, believed to have killed 93 people. He began killing in the 70s and managed to go undetected for over 3 decades because most of his victims were sex workers, the homeless, and drug addicts living on the fringes of society.
Jonathan Wayne Cox is accused of using the power tool to attack another man, cutting him to the bone.
Jonathan Cox was taken to the Franklin County Regional Jail after allegedly striking Billy Hensley with a rutting chainsaw. Now, we spoke with Billy Hensley earlier today. He didn't want to talk on camera. He had just been released from UK Hospital earlier this afternoon, but he tells me he doesn't know Cox or why Cox would do this to him. Now, Frankfort police were dispatched to Hensley's residence on the 800 block of Fields Avenue in Frankfort at 8 o'clock last night. Police reports say Cox pulled the chainsaw from the back of his truck, fired it up, and swiped Hensley's torso from his left nipple to his shoulder blade. Police say Hensley had a dispute earlier with a neighbor and struck him in the face, and that neighbor happens to be Cox's brother. Now, police are still investigating exactly what happened and if additional charges will be filed.
Some missions in Vietnam, they tell you to go out, seek and destroy. You destroy everything that's in that general area. Everything that's alive. It can be man, woman, child, pigs, chickens, everything. I got to liking going out and killing. We had one patrol, we went out, and that was between Polycline and Klantum, where near the Klantum River, we came across 2 females waist deep in the water. They looked like they were taking a bath. One of the GIs, one of the point men, walked out into the water like he was going to have some fun. One of the girls reached down below the water line. She had a knife that had wiggle blades on it and just sliced the guy from his groin to his throat. Me and another man, I had a machine gun, M60. Another guy had an M16, and I stitched the girl right across her thighs and up through here.
Just 17 years old, but police have charged William Skaratko as an adult for the first-degree murder of his own mother.
The 17-year-old son was actually in the residence at the time, and the investigation led them to believe that the son was responsible for the crime.
Police found 45-year-old Elizabeth Skaratko dead in her Glenview Garden apartment Tuesday afternoon. Her accused killer, her son, was sitting in the living room at the time. Earlier this month, a Baltimore County judge sentenced 16-year-old Lewin Powell III to life in prison for beating his mother to death with a baseball bat after an argument over his grades. And as police try to uncover a motive for the Skaratko slaying, neighbors try to digest its gruesome reality.
What can you say with today's youth? Especially, I mean, this is like the third or fourth family murder in 2 weeks?
Police say the victim suffered trauma to her upper body, although they're still waiting for autopsy results to see exactly how she was killed.
Each time I'd harm someone, each time I'd kill someone, there'd be an enormous amount, especially at first, enormous amount of horror, guilt, remorse afterwards. But then that impulse to do it again would come back even stronger. Now, believe me, the unique thing about how this worked, Dr. Dobson, is that I still felt in my regular life the full range of guilt and remorse about other things, regret, and you had this compartmentalized, very well focused, very sharply focused area where it was like a black hole. It was like a crack, and everything that fell into that crack just disappeared. Does that make sense? Yeah, it does.
14 years earlier in Watertown, he had been convicted of killing a young girl, an 8-year-old girl, and also at the time admitted being responsible for the death of a 10-year-old boy.
I caused his death. I'm not going to cry about it. It's just something that happened at that time. I didn't go seeking him to destroy him. I took it upon myself to seek and destroy. When I get mad, this chemical that's inside my head, whatever part of my body, elevates and I just lose control, and it brings on this sweating and other sensations. There's something inside me that is hidden that only comes out at certain moments.
The reason Arthur Shawcross was dubbed the Monster of the Rivers is because the majority of women he was convicted of killing were discovered, that is, their bodies were discovered in the area of the Genesee River Gorge. Thus, the media dubbed him the Monster of the Rivers.
Well, there's a status conference scheduled in the case against Wesley Brownlee for today. Take a look at this video. This is from a court appearance he made earlier this year. Brownlee is the man who is accused of committing 7 deadly shootings over an 18-month period, 5 of those shootings happening in Stockton, 2 occurring in Alameda County. Now, Brownlee is accused of the attempted murder as well of an 8th person who authorities say was shot by Brownlee and survived. At that court appearance back in January, his defense attorney spoke of concerns to the court about finding an appropriate jury, saying that the defendant's identity will be an issue with this case. The court was asked by the defense to have all media removed from the proceedings. That request was denied. So again, today will be a status conference, and that basically means that the court will hear from the DA's office, the defense attorneys, getting the current status of the case and determining the next steps required to keep things moving forward.